Before you start lesson 45, don't forget to complete test I in the test masters on proportions. Lesson 45 is about dividing by a decimal number. Now, you've been doing some division problems where you had decimal numbers that you were working with, but they weren't the divisor. Like you've had problems like this, 12.2 divided by 2. The divisor was a whole number. The dividend may have been a decimal number. Now you'll be having to deal with problems where the divisor is a decimal number. Maybe like this, 12 divided by 2.2. So what do you do on a problem like that? Well, you can just start using your long division format, and then you get to here and you say 2.2 goes into 12 how many times? Well, you could figure that out, but it's just a lot more mathematical calculations that you'll have to do. You're used to multiplying whole numbers together and working through those fairly quickly. Now you're saying 2.2 goes into 12. That's just a little more confusing. Here's what you can do. You can multiply above and below, or multiply the numerator and denominator by multiples of 10 until you get rid of the decimal place in the denominator. For example, on 12 divided by 2.2, you have to just move the decimal place over one place, so you multiply above and below by 10. Remember, if you multiply the numerator and denominator by the same value, you don't change anything. You just change the way it looks. 12 times 10 is 120. 2.2 times 10 is going to be 22. Now you have 120 divided by 22. You have a whole number in your denominator. Or in other words, your divisor is a whole number. So you can just say 22 into 120. Now you're used to working with numbers like that. 22 goes into 125 times. And then you'll have to bring down a zero, you have a decimal point there to deal with. And I won't go into how to figure out the answer because that's kind of besides the point here. It ends up being 5.45. Repeating. The important thing to see here on solving this problem when you had a decimal form for the divisor is you multiply above and below by a multiple of 10 to get rid of the decimal place in the denominator. If it's to the tenths place, you multiply above and below by 10. If it's to the hundredths place, you multiply above and below by 100. To the thousandths place, multiply above and below by 1,000, and so on. When you multiply above and below by the same number, it's kind of like the opposite of reducing a fraction. Usually you're canceling out common factors to simplify a fraction. Here we're multiplying above and below by a common factor. So again, it doesn't change the value. Just like when you cancel them out, it doesn't change the value. It just changes the way it looks. You have to do that. You don't have to, I guess, actually, but it really makes solving the division problem a whole lot easier because you have a whole number in your divisor, which is easier to do math on. Why don't we go ahead and do some practice problems? Let's do practice problem A, 6.15 divided by 0.6. When you're first learning these, the best thing to do is just to rewrite it like a fraction. 6.15 over 0.6. And the thing you have to remember is you can't have a divisor that's a decimal number. And you think, well, it's 6/10, so that means I need to multiply above and below by 10 to get rid of that decimal. And on the top, or the numerator, I'll have 61.5. And on the bottom, I'll end up with a 6. Now, I can go ahead and do long division. 6 goes into 6 one time. Bring down the 5. 6 goes into 15. Actually, we need to put a decimal place right here. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. I should have just said 6 goes into 1 0 times. And so we'd subtract get 1. Now I can bring down the 5. I brought it down a little too early there. 6 goes into 15 2 times. Bring down or we get a 3 there. Now bring down a 0. 6 goes into 30 exactly 5 times, and there's our answer. Now remember how we used to think about doing division problems? How many 6/10ths are in 6.15? Now doesn't it make sense that there would be around 10 of them? Because a 6/10th, if you multiply 6/10ths by 10, you'd have 6/10ths. So just try to make sure your answer makes sense. A little more than 10 6/10ths are in 6.15, so that does make sense. Of course, you can always check your work by doing multiplication. Multiply 6 times 10.25 and see if that gets you back to 61.5. One thing that you might forget to do on a problem like this is forget to multiply the numerator and the denominator by that multiple of 10. Make sure you multiply both of them by the multiple of 10. Otherwise, you're changing the problem. Look at practice problem B. 0.117 divided by 0.09. Let's just go ahead and rewrite this like a fraction. 0.117 over 0.09. Let's just think about that divisor. We need to make that a whole number. We have 9 hundredths. That means we need to multiply above by 100 and below by 100. And that would give us a 9 in the denominator. And in the numerator, we would end up with 11.7. So it doesn't really matter if the numerator is a whole number or a decimal form. We've already done lots of problems, and so we know that if the numerator has a decimal form, that's okay. It's just the denominator that can't have the decimal form. Go ahead and do the long division on this. 9 goes into 11 one time. And we need to put that decimal point up there in the quotient. 9 goes into 27 exactly 3 times. And that's our answer, 1.3. That's where we would stop. So that means there are 1.3 9s in 11.7. And of course we can always check our work over to the side. 1.3 times 9, that should equal 11.7. So we just do 13 times 9, put our decimal point back in, 11.7 is what we get. So we know that we did that problem right. The answer is 1.3. Let's do one more. 18 divided by 0.08. Why don't you try to do this one on your own, and why don't you try to just go ahead without doing the multiplication steps out where you multiply by a multiple of 10. Just try to remember what you do on this problem. So you see you have a divisor of 0.08. That means you need to move the decimal place to the right 2, right? And you would end up with 1800 as your dividend. And your divisor is going to be 8. All you do is multiply above and below by 100. That's how you get the 1800 and the 8. And then you just go ahead and do division. 8 goes into 18 2 times. Bring down the 0. 8 goes into 20 2 times. Bring down a 0. 8 goes into 40 exactly 5 times. And so there is your answer. You have a whole number answer on this one, 225. There are 225 eighths in 1800, or another way to think about it is 225.08 in 18. Let's do an application of these problems where the divisor has a decimal form. How many $1.25 gliders can be purchased for $20? So just think about that. We're trying to say how many $1.25s are in $20. So $1.25 is our divisor. We have 20 over 1.25. That means we need to move the decimal place to the right 2 or multiply by 100 on both of these, and we would end up with 2,000 over 125. We're thinking about this in terms of dollars and cents. We've really just changed this to 2,000 cents over 125 cents. Let's just go ahead and do division now. 125 and then 2,000 is the dividend. 125 goes into 200 one time. And we're left with 75. Bring down a 0. 125 goes into 750 exactly 6 times. And so that's our answer right there. There are 16 $1.25s in $20, or 16 $1.25 gliders can be purchased for $20. Just like when we are reducing fractions, we can factor out a common factor and cancel those. It doesn't change the value, it just changes the way it looks. In division problems like this, we can multiply above and below by a common factor to get rid of decimal places. And we do that by multiplying by the appropriate multiple of 10 to move the decimal place over until we get a whole number for our divisor. Okay, well that's all for